The morning light filtered through the sheer curtains of Camilla Roberts' modest row house in Baltimore, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors that David had refinished himself 30 years ago, at 72. Camilla moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had served her well through 4 decades as a registered nurse, but now reminded her daily of its limitations. Her arthritic fingers wrapped around the coffee mug as she sat at the kitchen table, reviewing her monthly budget with the methodical attention that had kept her financially stable through 12 years of widowhood. Social Security provided $1,847 per month. Her savings account held exactly $179,642 money accumulated through careful living and David's modest life insurance policy. The house was paid off, thank God, but the property taxes kept climbing, and the roof would need replacing within the next 5 years. She'd gotten 3 estimates, $12,000 minimum. Camilla wasn't destitute, but she wasn't comfortable either. Every expense required consideration, every purchase a calculation. The isolation was harder than the finances. Betty Martinez next door checked on her weekly, and there was the book club at the library. But most days passed in a silence that seemed to grow heavier with each passing year. Her relationship with Marcus, her only child, had always been complicated. After David's death, she'd hoped they would grow closer, but Marcus seemed uncomfortable with emotional intimacy. He called dutifully every few weeks, conversations that felt choreographed and brief. His wife Sophia was polite but distant, and the grandchildren Lily, 14, and Oliver, 11, were polite strangers who called her Grandma Roberts instead of just Grandma. When her phone rang that Tuesday morning at 9:15 a.m., interrupting her budget review, Camilla almost didn't answer. The caller ID showed Marcus's number, unusual for a weekday morning. "Mom." His voice was strained, thick with something that might have been tears. "I need to talk to you. Can I come over? It's important." The desperation in his tone sent a chill through her chest. In 45 years, she'd rarely heard Marcus cry. Even as a child, he'd been stoic, self-contained. "Of course, sweetheart, what's wrong?" "I'll explain when I get there. I'm bringing Sophia. We're in real trouble. Mom." They arrived 40 minutes later in their silver Honda Accord, a practical car that had always seemed to reflect Marcus's personality: reliable, unremarkable, safe. Sophia emerged from the passenger seat wearing designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Camilla's monthly grocery budget. But her usually perfect makeup was smudged, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Camilla," Sophia said, embracing her with unexpected warmth. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice." Marcus looked terrible. His usually pressed khakis were wrinkled, his button-down shirt had a coffee stain on the collar, and dark circles shadowed his eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd lost weight since Christmas, his face gaunt in a way that made him look older than his 45 years. "Sit down," Camilla said, leading them to the living room. "Tell me what's happening." Marcus collapsed into David's old recliner, the same chair where he'd sat as a boy when he was in trouble at school. He buried his face in his hands for a moment before looking up at her with red-rimmed eyes. "Mom, I've made some terrible mistakes, really terrible ones." Sophia moved to stand behind his chair, her manicured hand resting on his shoulder in a gesture that looked supportive but somehow felt rehearsed to Camilla. There was something in her daughter-in-law's expression that she couldn't quite read. Not panic, exactly, but a controlled intensity that didn't match the situation. "We're in debt," Marcus continued. "Serious debt. I made some investments that went bad, and then I tried to fix them with more investments, and—" his voice cracked. "We owe $175,000. The house is in foreclosure. We could lose everything." The number hit Camilla like a physical blow. $175,000 was almost exactly what she had in savings. The coincidence felt too precise, too convenient. But she pushed the suspicious thought aside. This was her son, her family. "How," she asked quietly, "how did this happen?" Sophia spoke up, her voice steady and professional. "Marcus has been trying to build a college fund for the kids. He got involved with some cryptocurrency investments that seemed safe, recommended by a colleague. When they started losing money, he thought he could recover the losses with Forex trading." "I was stupid," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could make it back before anyone noticed, but it just kept getting worse." Camilla studied her son's face, looking for the tells she'd learned to recognize during his adolescent years when he'd tried to hide failing grades or broken curfews. The shame seemed genuine, but there was something rehearsed about the explanation, too neat and too complete. "Have you talked to a financial advisor, a lawyer?" "We have," Sophia said quickly. "They've explored every option. The only way to stop the foreclosure and avoid bankruptcy is to pay off the immediate debts. We need $175,000 by next Friday." Next Friday. The timeline felt aggressive, pressured. That's only 6 days. "The foreclosure proceedings move fast," Marcus said. "Mom, I know it's asking a lot. I know it's everything you have. But I don't know where else to turn." For the first time since they'd arrived, Camilla felt a familiar maternal instinct kick in. This was her son, the baby she'd nursed through fevers and nightmares, the boy she'd cheered at baseball games and helped with homework. The thought of Lily and Oliver losing their home, becoming statistics in America's housing crisis, was unbearable. But $179,640 was everything she had. Everything David had left her. Everything that stood between her and poverty in her old age. "I need time to think about this," she said finally. Marcus's face fell. "Mom, I understand, but I said I need time to think." Her voice was sharper than she'd intended. "This isn't a decision I can make in 10 minutes. Sophia squeezed Marcus's shoulder. "Of course. We understand completely. It's a huge request." They left shortly afterward, with promises to call the next day. Camilla spent the evening walking through her house, touching the furniture she and David had chosen together, looking at the family photos that documented a life built slowly and carefully over decades. She called Betty Martinez. "They want everything I have," she told her neighbor over the phone. "Every penny." "Oh, honey," Betty said. "That's a lot of money. Are you sure Marcus is telling you the truth?" The question stung because it voiced the doubt Camilla had been trying to suppress. "He's my son." "I know he is, but $175,000 and needing it so quickly, it just seems what? Convenient. That the amount they need is exactly what you have." That night, Camilla barely slept. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios in her mind. If she gave Marcus the money and something happened to her, a stroke, a fall, a cancer diagnosis, she would have nothing. She would become dependent on others, possibly the very son who was asking her to sacrifice her security for his mistakes. But if she didn't help, and her grandchildren ended up homeless. The next morning, she made her decision. Marcus and Sophia returned that evening with a folder of documents, bank statements, foreclosure notices, legal papers that looked official and urgent. Sophia had prepared a presentation of sorts, spreading the papers across Camilla's dining room table with the efficiency of someone accustomed to making persuasive presentations. "I want to show you exactly where we stand," Sophia said, pointing to highlighted figures on bank statements. "Here's our current debt load, here's the foreclosure timeline, and here's what we need to stop the process." The papers looked legitimate, but Camilla found herself studying them with the skeptical eye she'd developed during her nursing career. When family members sometimes exaggerated symptoms to get stronger pain medications, the timeline was aggressive foreclosure proceedings that seemed to be moving faster than normal. The debt figures were precise to the dollar. Everything was just a little too neat. "I've been thinking," Camilla said slowly. "If I help you with this money, I want to restructure how we handle the house situation." Marcus looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" I'm not comfortable just handing over my life savings with nothing in return. If I'm going to help you avoid foreclosure, maybe we should consider having you move in here temporarily. Save on housing costs while you rebuild." She saw Marcus and Sophia exchange a glance that lasted just a fraction of a second too long. That's actually not a bad idea," Sophia said. "The kids love this house. They have so many memories here. But we'd need to make it official," Camilla continued. "I'd want to transfer ownership of this house to you, and you'd pay off your debts with my savings. Then we'd all live here together until you get back on your feet. Transfer ownership." Marcus's voice was carefully neutral. "Well, yes, if you're going to be living here indefinitely, and I'm using my entire savings to solve your financial problems, it makes sense to consolidate our resources. The house is worth about $240,000. Combined with my savings, that would give you the flexibility to handle not just the immediate crisis, but to rebuild properly." Sophia leaned forward, her dark eyes bright with interest. "That's very generous. Camilla, very thoughtful." But Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Mom, I don't want to take your house." "You're not taking it. We're pooling our resources as a family. This house is too big for me anyway, and maintaining it is getting expensive. If we're all living here together, it makes financial sense." The conversation continued for another hour, with Sophia asking detailed questions about the house's value, the condition of the roof and furnace, the property taxes. Her questions seemed more like those of a potential buyer than a family member planning to share a home. "We'll need to move quickly," Sophia said finally. "The foreclosure deadline isn't flexible." Over the next 3 days, Camilla found herself swept along in a whirlwind of paperwork and phone calls. Marcus seemed increasingly anxious to get everything finalized, constantly checking his phone and talking about deadlines. Sophia handled most of the logistics, arranging meetings with lawyers and bankers with an efficiency that impressed but also somehow bothered Camilla. The lawyer, James Patterson, was someone Sophia had found. He specializes in family financial restructuring. She'd explained. Patterson was young, maybe 35, with an expensive suit and an office in a gleaming downtown building that seemed too upscale for someone handling a family crisis. "Mrs. Roberts," Patterson said, spreading documents across his conference table. "Your son and daughter-in-law have explained the situation. This is a very generous thing you're doing." "I just want to make sure everything is legal and proper," Camilla said. "I want to understand exactly what I'm signing." Shut. Patterson walked her through the documents: a quitclaim deed transferring the house to Marcus and Sophia, a savings account withdrawal authorization, and a family loan agreement that would theoretically require them to pay her back over 10 years. "Now, the loan agreement," Patterson said, "is more of a formality. Given that you'll all be living together, and given the family nature of the transaction, it's really just for tax purposes." Something about his tone bothered her. "What do you mean, for tax purposes?" "Well, if we structure this as a gift rather than a loan, there could be significant tax implications for you. The loan agreement protects everyone." Camilla looked at Marcus, who was staring at his hands. "And if something happens to me, if I die or become incapacitated, the loan would be forgiven," Sophia said quickly. "Obviously, we wouldn't expect your estate to pursue collection from your own family." The documents were signed on a Friday afternoon. Camilla's savings account was emptied. The funds transferred to Marcus and Sophia's account to immediately address the foreclosure proceedings. The house deed was transferred, making Marcus and Sophia the legal owners of the property where Camilla had lived for 32 years. "We'll start moving our things in this weekend," Sophia said as they left the lawyer's office. "The kids are so excited to live with Grandma." But that evening, as Camilla sat in what was legally no longer her house, she felt an inexplicable sense of dread. She tried to call it adjustment anxiety. Of course she would feel strange about such a major change, but the feeling persisted. A cold knot in her stomach that reminded her of the intuition that had served her well during her nursing career. The sense that something was wrong, even when she couldn't identify exactly what. She woke up Saturday morning to silence. Complete, unnatural silence. There should have been sounds: Marcus loading boxes from a U-Haul truck, Sophia directing the placement of furniture, Lily and Oliver's voices as they explored their new living arrangements. Instead, there was nothing but the tick of the grandfather clock David had bought for their 25th anniversary. Camilla walked through the house in her robe, calling out softly, "Marcus, Sophia." Her voice echoed in the empty hallway, answered only by the settling sounds of the old house. The living room looked different, cleaner, emptier. The family photos that had cluttered the mantel were gone. Sophia's decorative vases, which she'd brought over the previous week, had vanished. Even the children's backpacks, which had been stacked by the front door, were nowhere to be seen. Her hands started to shake as she rushed to the kitchen, hoping to find a note, some explanation. The counter was bare, except for a single piece of paper folded in half, her name written across it in Sophia's precise handwriting. With trembling fingers, she unfolded it. "Camilla, thank you for everything. We've decided to start fresh somewhere new. The house sold yesterday. Closing was expedited. Please don't try to find us. We need this clean break to rebuild our lives. S." Camilla read the note 3 times before the words truly sank in. The house sold yesterday. Her house, the house she'd signed over to help them avoid foreclosure, had been sold without her knowledge, without any warning. She sank into the kitchen chair where Marcus had sat crying just a week ago, begging for her help. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was now homeless in what used to be her own home. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number: "House sale closed. New owners take possession. Monday. You need to be out by Sunday." Today was Saturday. Camilla stared at the message, trying to process the magnitude of what had happened. She had no money. She'd given it all to Marcus. She had no home. He'd sold it out from under her. She had nowhere to go and less than 2 days to figure it out. She tried calling Marcus's number. Disconnected. Sophia's phone went straight to a voicemail box that was full. She checked their social media accounts. Both had been deactivated overnight. They hadn't just left her. They'd erased themselves completely, covering their tracks like criminals. Betty Martinez found Camilla 3 hours later, still sitting at the kitchen table in her robe, staring at Sophia's note. Betty had let herself in through the back door when no one answered, her knocking a liberty she'd taken often during the 12 years since David's death. "Camilla, honey, I saw the moving truck this morning, and then... What's wrong? You look terrible." The story came out in broken pieces, punctuated by Betty's increasingly outraged exclamations. "They sold your house while you were sleeping. How is that even legal?" "Because I signed it over to them," Camilla said dully. "Legally. It was their house to sell." Betty sat down heavily in the chair across from her. "But where are you supposed to go?" That was the question Camilla had been avoiding. At 72, with no savings and no home, her options were terrifyingly limited. She could probably afford a few weeks in a motel. But then what senior apartment complexes had waiting lists measured in years? Her Social Security barely covered basic living expenses, let alone rent in Baltimore's inflated housing market. "I might have to call the Salvation Army," she admitted, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. "See if they have any emergency housing." Betty's eyes filled with tears. "You'll stay with us while you figure things out." "No," Camilla said quickly. "I won't impose on your family. You have your own troubles." But Betty's kindness, after the calculated cruelty of her own family, nearly broke her. She excused herself to the bathroom and cried until her chest ached. That afternoon, Camilla began the humiliating process of packing her life into suitcases. 72 years reduced to what she could carry. She found herself touching things she'd taken for granted: David's reading glasses still on his nightstand, the quilt her mother had made for their wedding, photos of Marcus at every stage of his life. How had that sweet little boy turned into someone who could do this to his own mother? She was folding David's favorite sweater when she discovered the first clue that this betrayal ran deeper than she'd imagined. Her phone buzzed with a text from Betty, who was trying to help by researching the house sale online. Found the listing. Look at this. The real estate listing showed her house described in glowing terms: charming colonial with original hardwood floors and vintage fixtures. The sale price was $285,000, significantly more than the $240,000 she'd estimated. But there was something else in the listing that made her blood run cold. In the property disclosure section, buried in legal jargon, was a note about ongoing structural assessments and potential foundation issues currently under investigation. Foundation issues. Structural problems. Camilla's heart started racing as memories clicked into place. She remembered Marcus mentioning basement moisture problems over the past year, his insistence on doing maintenance work himself, his dismissal of her concerns about new cracks appearing in the walls. She grabbed her reading glasses and called up the full property disclosure on her phone. There were mentions of settling concerns, recommended geological surveys, and previous homeowner awareness of subsurface instability. She knew about foundation problems, had known for years. She and David had discovered them when they'd tried to finish the basement in 1998. The whole house sat on what the engineer had called problematic soil composition. Fixing it would cost more than the house was worth, so they'd simply avoided using the basement and hoped for the best. Marcus knew about it too. He'd been 22 when the engineer had delivered his report, had seen the paperwork, heard the warnings about potential settling and structural compromise. So when she'd signed the house over to them, they'd inherited not just a property, but a massive liability. And they'd sold it without disclosing the problems to the buyers, making Camilla an unwitting accomplice to fraud. Her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. Mrs. Roberts. "This is Jennifer Walsh from Walsh & Associates Real Estate. I'm calling about the property at 1247 Maple Street." Camilla's mouth went dry. "What about it?" "We're representing the buyers, and there's been a significant development regarding the foundation inspection. It appears there are some serious structural issues that weren't properly disclosed in the sale." "What kind of issues?" "Substantial foundation settling that poses safety concerns. The buyers are facing potentially hundreds of thousands in repairs, and they're exploring legal action against the sellers. Do you happen to know how we might contact Marcus Roberts and his wife?" "They seem to have disappeared, and we have some very urgent papers to serve." Camilla looked down at Sophia's cold note, and for the first time since finding it, she smiled. "I'm sorry," she said calmly. "I have no idea where they are." And the extended stay motel room smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and other people's disappointments. For $89 a night. Camilla got 300 square feet of beige walls, a kitchenette with a 2-burner stove, and the sound of highway traffic that never stopped. She'd been there a week, watching her remaining savings dwindle with terrifying speed. The legal documents had started arriving on day 3. The Walsh family, a young couple with twin toddlers who'd bought her house, planning to start their dream life in what they thought was a solid family home, had discovered that the foundation was actively settling, that the entire structure was compromised, and that the previous owners had vanished without a trace. Their lawyer was demanding information about Marcus and Sophia. The insurance company was launching an investigation into potential fraud. The real estate agent was threatening legal action against everyone involved in the sale. And there Camilla sat, trapped in the middle with no money to hire her own lawyer and nowhere to hide from the growing scandal. The caseworker at the Social Security office, a tired-looking woman named Sandra, had reviewed Camilla's situation with professional sympathy that somehow made everything worse. "Mrs. Roberts, I have to be honest with you. Your monthly benefit of $1,847 isn't going to cover much more than basic survival. Have you considered applying for housing assistance? What's the waiting list like for seniors in this area? About 18 months, maybe 2 years?" 2 years. At 72, with her health already showing signs of stress. 2 years felt like a lifetime. The worst part was the isolation. Marcus had been her primary connection to family, her main source of purpose and joy. Now he was gone, and she found herself wondering if Lily and Oliver even knew what their parents had done. Did they think she'd simply chosen to disappear from their lives? Betty called every few days, checking on her with gentle persistence. She'd offered again to let Camilla stay with them, but Camilla couldn't bear the thought of being a burden. She'd already lost too much dignity to sacrifice what little remained. The depression crept in slowly, like water rising in a basement. Some mornings, she couldn't find a reason to get out of bed. The motel's kitchenette mocked her with its limitations. She'd gone from cooking Sunday dinners for family to heating canned soup for one. She'd started talking to David's picture, propped on the nightstand beside the few possessions she'd managed to salvage. "I really messed up this time," she told his smiling face one particularly dark evening. "You always said I trusted too easily." The silence that answered was worse than any argument they'd ever had. She tried to piece together the signs she'd missed, the red flags she'd chosen to ignore. Sophia's constant comments about the house being too big for her, Marcus's sudden interest in her financial situation after years of minimal contact, the way they'd rushed the paperwork, discouraging her from having her own lawyer review everything. How had she been so blind? Then came the phone call that changed everything. "Mrs. Roberts, this is Detective Ryan Thompson with the County Fraud Unit. I was hoping we could schedule a time to talk." Camilla's blood turned to ice. "About what?" "About the property transfer and subsequent sale of 1247 Maple Street. We've opened an investigation based on complaints from the current property owners." "I haven't done anything wrong," she said quickly, though her voice shook. "No, ma'am, I don't believe you have. But we need to understand the full scope of what happened. There are some irregularities in the paperwork that suggest this wasn't a standard family transfer." Irregularities. The word echoed in her mind long after she hung up. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay in the narrow motel bed listening to her upstairs neighbor's television bleeding through the thin walls and tried to remember exactly what Marcus had told her about his debts. The more she thought about it, the more holes appeared in his story. He'd claimed the house was in foreclosure, but she'd never seen any official papers. He'd said lawyers were involved, but he'd never given her their names or contact information. He'd painted a picture of financial ruin so convincing that she'd handed over her life savings without asking for proof. What if the debts had been a lie? What if they'd simply wanted her money and her house, and they'd manufactured a crisis to get them? The thought was so devastating that she actually felt sick. If Marcus had never been in real trouble, if this had all been an elaborate con, then her sacrifice had been meaningless. Worse than meaningless, it had been the act of a fool. She got up and made herself tea with shaking hands, then sat at the tiny table by the window. Outside, the parking lot was empty except for a few cars belonging to other displaced people who, like her, had nowhere else to go. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark window, a pale, thin woman who looked older than her 72 years. The woman in the glass bore little resemblance to the confident person she'd been just 2 months ago, when she'd had a home and savings and a family. That woman had been naive, but she'd also believed she was loved. The next morning brought another call from Detective Thompson. This time, he wasn't asking for a meeting, he was informing her that Marcus and Sophia had been located. "They're in Playa del Carmen, Mexico," he said. "We're working with international authorities to determine our options for extradition." Mexico. While she was sleeping in a motel room, worrying about how to afford groceries, they were living in a beach paradise on money that had been hers. "Mrs. Roberts, I need to ask you some difficult questions about the condition of the house when you transferred ownership. The buyers are claiming that significant structural problems were concealed during the sale." Camilla closed her eyes, feeling the weight of what she was about to admit. "I knew about the foundation issues." "You knew. My husband and I discovered them years ago. We never fixed them because the cost was prohibitive. Marcus knew about them too. He was there when we got the engineer's report." There was a long pause. "Mrs. Roberts, did you disclose these issues to your son when you transferred the property?" "No," she said quietly. "I thought they were going to live there. I thought it would be a family home. I never imagined they would sell it." Another pause, longer this time. "Ma'am, I think you need to speak with a lawyer. It's possible that you're a victim here, not a perpetrator, but the situation is complex." After she hung up, Camilla sat in her chair by the window and watched the world go by outside. Other people living their normal lives, going to work, visiting family, secure in their homes and relationships. But as the day wore on, something began to shift inside her. The despair was still there, but underneath it, she felt the first stirrings of something else. Anger. Marcus and Sophia were living in Mexico on her money, probably laughing about the old woman they'd left behind. They thought they'd won, thought they'd gotten away with it. They had no idea what they'd actually done to themselves. The law office of Foster & Associates occupied the second floor of a converted warehouse in East Baltimore. Nothing like the glossy corporate firms she'd seen on television. Amanda Foster was younger than Camilla had expected, maybe 40, with graying auburn hair pulled back in a practical bun and intelligent hazel eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Roberts," she said, gesturing to a chair across from her cluttered desk. "Detective Thompson filled me in on the basics of your situation. I have to say, this is one of the more complex cases I've encountered." "Complex how?" "Well, on the surface, it looks like a family property transfer that went wrong. But the more Detective Thompson digs, the more it looks like a long-term, coordinated fraud scheme." Over the next hour, Amanda walked Camilla through the maze of laws potentially violated elder abuse, property fraud, concealment of material defects, possible mail fraud if they'd used false information in any of their paperwork. "The good news," Amanda said, "is that the buyers of your house aren't pursuing action against you personally. Their insurance company has determined that you were likely an unwitting participant in the fraud." Camilla felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "The bad news is that recovering your losses is going to be difficult. Even if we can prove fraud, your son and daughter-in-law appear to have moved most of the money offshore." Amanda pulled out another document, this one with an official seal at the top. "However, there's been an interesting development. The Mexican authorities have frozen several bank accounts linked to your son and his wife." Camilla's heart jumped. "Why?" "Because they made a critical error. When they purchased property in Mexico, they had to declare the source of their funds. They claimed the money came from the sale of a family property that had been gifted to them." Amanda leaned forward, her expression growing more animated. "But when the Mexican bank did their due diligence, which they take very seriously for large foreign investments, they discovered the foundation problems and the ongoing legal issues in Baltimore. So they're in trouble there too." "More than trouble. Mexico has very strict laws about foreign nationals bringing in money from potentially fraudulent real estate transactions. They don't want their country used as a haven for international property scams." Amanda pulled out her phone and showed Camilla a news article from a Mexican English-language newspaper. The headline read, "American couple detained in property fraud investigation." Below it was a photo of Marcus and Sophia being escorted from what looked like a police station. Seeing them in handcuffs should have made Camilla sad. Marcus was still her son, still the little boy she'd raised and loved, but all she felt was cold satisfaction. They looked terrified and disheveled, nothing like the confident criminals who'd disappeared with her life savings. "There's something else," Amanda said, pulling Camilla's attention back to the conversation. "The foundation problems with your house, they're worse than anyone initially realized." She handed Camilla an engineering report commissioned by the new owner's insurance company. Camilla scanned the technical language, struggling to understand the implications. "What does this mean in plain English?" "It means the house is essentially uninhabitable. The foundation has shifted so much that the entire structure is compromised. The repair costs are estimated at over $400,000, more than the house is worth." Camilla stared at the report, remembering David's worried face 25 years ago when the first engineer had delivered his assessment. They'd known it was bad, but not this bad. "The interesting thing is the timeline," Amanda continued. "According to this report, the deterioration accelerated significantly in the past 3 years. "What does that mean?" "It means that your son and daughter-in-law were living in a house that was literally falling down around them, and they knew it. But they never said anything to you because they were planning this all along." The calculated cruelty of it took Camilla's breath away. This wasn't a desperate act by people in crisis. This was a long-term plan to defraud her while destroying her life in the process. "There's more," Amanda said gently. "We've been investigating your son's financial history, the debts he claimed to have, the foreclosure proceedings. There's no record of any of it." The room began to spin slightly. "None of it was real. None of it. In fact, based on what we can determine, Marcus and Sophia have been financially stable for years. They both had good jobs, a decent savings account, and no significant debts beyond normal household expenses." The betrayal cut deeper than Camilla had thought possible. Every tear Marcus had shed in her kitchen, every desperate plea for help, every promise to pay her back, all of it had been theater. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would they do this to me?" Amanda's expression softened. "From what we can piece together, they'd been planning to leave the country for some time. They needed liquid capital to purchase property abroad and establish themselves in Mexico. Your house and savings represented an easy source of funding." "Easy," Camilla repeated bitterly. "I'm sorry. I know how difficult this must be to hear." Camilla looked out the window at the busy street below, watching people hurry past with their everyday concerns and normal families. "What happens now?" "Now we have some choices. The Mexican authorities are willing to work with us if your son and daughter-in-law agree to make restitution. They want this resolved quickly to avoid an international incident. And if they don't agree, then they face prosecution in Mexico, which could mean years in prison and complete forfeiture of their assets. Either way, you're likely to recover at least some of your losses." Amanda handed her another document. This one marked settlement proposal. "They've already indicated through their Mexican lawyer that they're willing to negotiate." Camilla looked at the numbers on the page. It wasn't everything she'd lost, but it was enough to give her back some semblance of security. "There's one more thing," Amanda said, her tone becoming more serious. "The settlement would require you to sign a non-disclosure agreement. You wouldn't be able to discuss the details of what happened publicly. They want to buy my silence. Essentially, yes. The question is whether that's acceptable to you." That evening, back in her motel room, Camilla sat with the settlement documents spread across her tiny table. The numbers were generous enough to buy a small condo, rebuild modest savings, and live comfortably for the rest of her life. But something bothered her about the non-disclosure clause. It felt like they were trying to erase what they'd done, to buy the right to never be held accountable for their cruelty. Her phone rang. Betty calling for her weekly check-in. "How are you holding up, dear?" Camilla told her about the settlement offer, about Marcus and Sophia's arrest in Mexico, about the possibility of getting her money back. "That's wonderful news," Betty exclaimed. "You must be so relieved." "I am," Camilla said, though her voice lacked conviction. Betty had always been perceptive. But it feels like they're getting away with it. A slap on the wrist, and then they go back to their lives while I try to rebuild mine." "Camilla," Betty said gently, "sometimes the best revenge is simply moving on and being happy despite what they did to you." She was right, of course. But as Camilla looked at David's picture on her nightstand, she couldn't shake the feeling that accepting the settlement would be letting them win. They thought they knew her, thought she was just a weak old woman they could exploit and discard. They had no idea what they'd awakened when they decided to destroy her life. Maybe it was time to show them exactly who they were dealing with. But first, she needed to understand the full scope of what they'd done. The next morning, instead of calling Amanda to accept the settlement, Camilla did something she hadn't done in months. She spent the entire day researching. What she discovered made her blood run cold. She remembered the water damage Marcus had mentioned the previous spring, the emergency that had required $5,000 for restoration work. She'd written the check without question, trusting her son's explanation about insurance deductibles and restoration companies. The company name had been Chen Home Solutions. Camilla's hands shook as she looked up the business registration online. Chen Home Solutions had been incorporated in Delaware 3 years ago. The sole owner was listed as Sophia Chen Roberts. They hadn't just stolen from her once. They'd been systematically defrauding her for years, creating fake emergencies and phantom businesses to extract money while simultaneously destroying the value of her property. She called Amanda immediately. "I need you to investigate something," Camilla said, her voice steadier than it had been in weeks. "Chen Home Solutions. I think I've been paying my daughter-in-law for fake repairs for the past 3 years. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for nearly 30 seconds. "Camilla," Amanda finally said, "if what you're suggesting is true, we're not talking about a desperate couple making bad decisions anymore. This is organized criminal activity spanning multiple years." "How much?" Camilla whispered. "I'll need to do a full audit, but based on what you've told me so far, we could be looking at tens of thousands of dollars in fraudulent charges over 3 years. Camilla thought about all the times Marcus had called with urgent repair needs, all the cash she'd handed over without question because she trusted her son, all the times Sophia had been so grateful for her help while literally stealing from her. "They played a long game," Camilla said, more to herself than to Amanda. "A very long game, and a very stupid one, because now we have a paper trail going back years." That afternoon, Amanda and Camilla met with Detective Thompson again, this time with a stack of evidence that painted a picture of calculated, long-term elder abuse and fraud. The detective's expression grew grimmer as they laid out the timeline. "This changes everything," he said finally. "We're not talking about a desperate couple making bad decisions. This is organized criminal activity." "What does that mean for the Mexican situation?" Amanda asked. "It means we're going to request extradition for prosecution here. The charges we can file now are much more serious than anything they're facing there." He turned to Camilla. "Mrs. Roberts, I want you to understand what this means. If we pursue this course, your son could be looking at 8 to 12 years in federal prison. Your daughter-in-law could face similar charges." The weight of it hit Camilla like a physical blow. Marcus, her little boy, could spend the rest of his 40s and possibly his 50s in prison. Lily and Oliver would grow up with their father behind bars. "What about my grandchildren?" she asked quietly. "Child Services in Mexico is already involved because of the arrests. The children are currently staying with a family friend, but if their parents are extradited—" He didn't need to finish. Lily and Oliver would become casualties of their parents' greed. Detective Thompson pulled out a thick folder. "I want to show you the full scope of what we've uncovered." Over the next hour, he walked them through 3 years of systematic fraud. Year 1, Marcus had approached Camilla about emergency roof repairs after a storm. The restoration company, Chen Home Solutions, had charged $8,500 for work that was never actually done. The before and after photos had been digitally manipulated. Year 2, a burst pipe in the basement had required immediate attention. Another $6,200 to Chen Home Solutions. The pipe had been deliberately damaged, then superficially repaired to hide the evidence. Year 3. Foundation settling had required urgent intervention. $12,000 for structural stabilization that had actually made the problem worse. Marcus had been deliberately weakening the foundation to create a legitimate-looking disaster. The total fraudulent charges over 3 years, Detective Thompson said, come to $31,700. Combined with the house and savings theft, we're looking at a total loss of approximately $490,000. Camilla stared at the number. Nearly $500,000, stolen by her own son over the course of 3 years. The methodical nature of it was breathtaking in its cruelty. "There's something else," Detective Thompson continued. "We've been monitoring their communications in Mexico. Your son has been in contact with other family members specifically, his wife's parents in California." "Sophia's parents?" "Yes."
"It appears they've been wiring money to Marcus and Sophia in Mexico. We think they may have been told a different story about what happened." Amanda leaned forward. "What kind of different story?" "According to the wire transfer records, the money is being sent for legal defense against false allegations by an unstable elderly relative." The betrayal kept getting deeper. Not only had they stolen from her and abandoned her, but they were now painting her as a mentally unstable old woman to gather sympathy and financial support from other family members. "Can we contact Sophia's parents?" Camilla asked. "We can, but it might complicate the legal proceedings. If they're sending money based on false information, they could become unwitting accomplices to money laundering." Camilla felt a familiar surge of anger. How many people are they going to destroy with their lies? That evening, alone in her motel room, Camilla made a decision that surprised even her. Instead of feeling overwhelmed by the scope of Marcus and Sophia's crimes, she felt energized for the first time in months. They had underestimated her completely. They thought she was a helpless old woman who would quietly disappear rather than fight back. They had no idea that 40 years as a nurse had taught her to be methodical, persistent, and unafraid of difficult situations. She called Amanda. "I want to pursue full prosecution," she said. "All of it, every charge you can file." "Camila, are you sure the settlement offer is generous, and prosecution could take years? There's no guarantee you'll recover more money, and the emotional toll—" "I'm sure. They've been counting on me being too weak or too ashamed to fight back. They're wrong. What about Lily and Oliver?" Camilla closed her eyes, picturing her grandchildren's faces. Lily and Oliver deserve to learn that actions have consequences, that you can't destroy people just because you think they're too weak to fight back. The next few weeks passed in a blur of legal activity. Marcus and Sophia were extradited from Mexico, their assets frozen pending investigation. The Mexican property they'd purchased was seized and would be sold to pay restitution. Twist came when Detective Thompson called with an unexpected development. "Mrs. Roberts, we've discovered something interesting about your son's employment history. He was fired from his accounting job 18 months ago for embezzling client funds." "Fired, but he told me he was still working." "He's been unemployed for over a year. The embezzlement charges were dropped when he made restitution. But it explains how they've been supporting themselves while planning this fraud. So when he came to me crying about debts and foreclosure,
He was actually describing his real financial situation, just not in the way you thought. He did owe money to his former employer and to the clients he'd stolen from. The foreclosure threat was real, but it was for a different house, a rental property they'd been secretly investing in using money stolen from you. The layers of deception seemed endless. Every conversation, every tear, every desperate plea had been built on lies wrapped in more lies. "There's something else," Detective Thompson continued. "We found communications between Marcus and Sophia dating back 4 years. They've been planning this specific fraud since before your husband died." The words hit Camilla like a physical blow. Before David died. The earliest message we found has Marcus telling Sophia, "When the old man dies, Mom will be alone and vulnerable. That's when we make our move." Camilla sank into her motel room chair, struggling to breathe. They had been planning to exploit her grief before David was even gone. They had been waiting for her to become a widow, counting on her loneliness and vulnerability to make their scheme possible. "Mrs. Roberts, are you there?" "I'm here," she said quietly. "Detective Thompson, I want them to face every possible charge. Everything. I don't care how long it takes." The preliminary hearing was held on a gray October morning in Baltimore's federal courthouse. Camilla sat in the gallery, watching her son and daughter-in-law enter in orange jumpsuits and shackles. Marcus looked older, thinner, his hair showing gray she'd never noticed before. Sophia kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the courtroom. For a moment, seeing Marcus in chains, Camilla felt a flicker of the old maternal instinct. This was her baby, her little boy who'd come to her with scraped knees and broken toys. The urge to protect him was so strong it made her chest ache. Then she remembered the messages Detective Thompson had shown her, the ones where Marcus had referred to her as the Mark, and discussed the best ways to extract maximum value from her grief. The federal prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chen, no relation to Sophia, despite the shared surname, laid out the charges: elder abuse, 5 counts, wire fraud, 8 counts, property fraud, 3 counts, money laundering, 2 counts, conspiracy to commit fraud, 1 count. If convicted on all counts, Marcus faced 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Sophia faced 12 to 18 years. After the hearing, Marcus's court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking man named Robert Henley, approached Camilla in the courthouse hallway. "Mrs. Roberts, I'd like to discuss a possible plea agreement." Amanda stepped protectively closer to Camilla. "What kind of plea agreement?" "My client is prepared to plead guilty to reduced charges in exchange for a lighter sentence and full restitution. He's also prepared to provide complete cooperation in recovering all of your client's losses." "What's the catch?" Camilla asked. Henley shifted uncomfortably. "Well, there would need to be an agreement that Mrs. Roberts would be willing to provide character testimony about Marcus's childhood, his relationship with his father, the financial pressures he was under. You want me to help reduce his sentence, in exchange for guaranteed restitution and an acknowledgement of responsibility." "Yes." Camilla looked through the courthouse window at Marcus being led away in his orange jumpsuit. He looked back at her for just a moment, and she saw something in his eyes that might have been remorse or might have been calculation. "I need time to think about it," she said. That night, Camilla couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about a conversation she'd had with David shortly before his death. He'd been worried about Marcus, concerned about his emotional distance and his obsession with money. "I think we spoiled him," David had said. "Never let him face real consequences for anything. Maybe we did him a disservice." She'd dismissed his concerns at the time, defending their son against what she saw as unfair criticism. Now she wondered if David had seen something she'd missed. Her phone rang at 11 p.m., an international number that she almost didn't answer. "Grandma Roberts, The voice was older, more mature than she remembered, but unmistakably Lily's. "Lily, sweetheart, how are you?" "I'm okay. We're okay. Oliver and I are staying with a really nice family here. They're helping us with school and everything." There was a pause, heavy with unspoken questions. "Grandma, I need to ask you something. Did Mom and Dad really steal from you?" Camila closed her eyes, searching for words that could explain the inexplicable to a 15-year-old who'd lost everything. "Yes, sweetheart, they did. The lady from Child Services said they took your house and all your money. She said that's why they can't come home." "That's right." A longer pause. "Are you mad at us for what they did?" The question broke Camilla's heart in ways she didn't know were possible. "Oh, honey. No, I'm not mad at you. I could never be mad at you." "Then why?" Lily's voice wavered. "Why didn't you try to help us come home? The lawyer said you could have asked for custody." And there it was, the question Camilla had been dreading, the decision that haunted her sleepless nights. "Lily, I wanted to. I wanted to so badly. But I'm 72 years old, and I was living in a motel room with no money. I couldn't take care of you the way you deserved. We wouldn't have minded being poor with you." The simplicity of her statement, the faith it implied, nearly destroyed Camilla. But she forced herself to think beyond emotion, to consider what would really have been best for two traumatized children. "Sweetheart, you and Oliver deserve stability. You deserve to be with people who can give you a future. I couldn't do that." They talked for another hour, and Camilla learned that Lily was doing well in school, that Oliver had made friends and was playing soccer, that they were both learning Spanish and adapting to their new life. They were building a future without her, without their parents, without any of the family they'd been born into. "Grandma," Lily said before hanging up, "I understand why you had to make the choices you made. I just want you to know that—" After the call ended, Camilla sat in her motel room and cried for an hour, not for herself, but for the relationship she'd lost, for the grandmother she'd never get to be, for the children who'd been forced to grow up too fast because of their parents' greed. The next morning, she called Marcus's lawyer. "I've made my decision about the plea agreement," she said, "and Chana and Twist 5. I'm rejecting it. I want this to go to trial. I want everything they did exposed in open court." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Mrs. Roberts, I have to advise you that this decision could result in much harsher sentences for your son and daughter-in-law. It could also mean you recover less money, and the trial could take years. I understand that. May I ask why you're making this choice?" Camilla looked at herself in the motel room mirror, seeing a woman who'd been tested in ways she'd never imagined and had somehow found strength she didn't know she possessed. "Because they're counting on me to choose family loyalty over justice. They're counting on me to protect them from the consequences of their actions. They've been counting on my weakness their entire lives." She paused, thinking about David's words, about the conversation they'd never finished. "It's time they learned that actions have consequences. It's time I stopped enabling them." That afternoon, Marcus called her from jail. She almost didn't accept the collect call, but something made her answer. "Mom!" His voice was different, smaller, younger, like the boy she remembered. "Marcus, Mom, please, I know what you must think of me, but I need you to reconsider the plea deal. Sophia and I, we made mistakes, terrible mistakes. But if you let this go to trial, Lily and Oliver will have to live with the shame of having parents in prison for 20 years. The manipulation was still there, even now. Even facing decades in prison, he was trying to use her love for her grandchildren to escape consequences. You should have thought about Lily and Oliver before you decided to systematically rob your own mother. It wasn't supposed to be like this. We were going to pay you back. Once we got established in Mexico, we were going to make sure you were taken care of. With what money? Marcus, the money you stole from me. We made mistakes. No. Camilla's voice was harder than she'd ever heard it. You made choices. Calculated, deliberate choices over the course of 4 years. You waited for your father to die so you could exploit my grief. You created fake emergencies to steal my money. You destroyed my house to make it worthless. You planned every detail of how to leave me homeless and destitute. Silence. Marcus, do you know what the worst part is? It's not the money or the house. It's that you looked me in the eye and lied with such conviction that I never suspected a thing. You cried in my kitchen. You let me comfort you while you were planning to destroy me. Mom, I'm not your mother anymore. Marcus, mothers protect their children. They don't systematically rob them and leave them to die alone. She hung up before he could respond. Moral climax.
That evening, Camilla made a decision that surprised even her. She called Amanda Foster. I want to do something beyond just prosecuting them, she said. I want to make sure this doesn't happen to other families. What do you have in mind? I want to speak publicly about what happened. I want to write about it, talk about it, make sure people know what signs to look for. But the trial will be public record anyway. I'm not going to hide what they did to me. I'm going to make sure everyone knows. Over the next few weeks, as the legal proceedings moved forward, Camilla began speaking to reporter, to advocacy groups, to anyone who would listen. She told her story without shame, without trying to protect Marcus and Sophia's reputations, without softening the calculated cruelty of what they'd done. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of families reached out with similar stories. Adult children who'd systematically robbed elderly parents. Elaborate cons that had destroyed families. Financial abuse that had left seniors homeless and destitute. Camilla realized she wasn't alone, that her story was part of a much larger epidemic of elder abuse that thrived in shadows and silence. She also realized that she had found her purpose again. For the first time since David's death, she felt needed, useful, important. The trial lasted 6 weeks, every day. Camilla sat in the gallery watching as prosecutors methodically dismantled the lies Marcus and Sophia had built their scheme on. The evidence was overwhelming: emails, financial records, recorded phone calls, testimony from the Mexican authorities. Marcus took the stand in his own defense, trying to paint himself as a desperate father who'd made bad decisions under pressure. But Patricia Chen, the prosecutor, was relentless in her cross-examination. Mr. Roberts, she said, holding up a printed email. This is a message you sent to your wife 4 years ago, before your father's death. You wrote, "When the old man dies, Mom will be alone and vulnerable. That's when we make our move." Does that sound like the words of a desperate father? Or the words of a predator planning to exploit his mother's grief? Marcus had no answer. Sophia never took the stand. Her lawyer advised against it, knowing that her role in creating the fake businesses and manipulating the financial records would be impossible to explain away. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts, Marcus was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. Sophia received 10 years. They would be eligible for parole in 8 and 7 years respectively, but only if they demonstrated genuine remorse and made full restitution to their victims. The financial recovery was less complete than Camilla had hoped. The Mexican property sale, combined with seized assets, returned about $165,000 of her losses, roughly 60% of what had been stolen. It wasn't everything, but it was enough. With the recovered money, Camilla bought a 2-bedroom condo in a senior-friendly complex in Towson. It was smaller than her old house, but it was hers, bought with her own money, protected by security systems and legal safeguards that would prevent anyone from taking it from her again. She joined a support group for victims of family financial abuse, eventually becoming a group leader. She spoke at conferences,
wrote articles for magazines, and consulted with law enforcement agencies developing training programs for recognizing elder abuse. Betty Martinez moved to a senior community near Camila's new condo, and they had coffee every morning, sharing the comfortable friendship of people who'd weathered storms together. The hardest part was the silence from Lily and Oliver. After that one phone call, there had been no other contact. Camila sent birthday cards and Christmas presents to their foster family's address, but she never knew if the children received them. On her 74th birthday, 18 months after Marcus's sentencing, Camila received an unexpected package. The return address was unfamiliar, but when she opened it, she found a hand-drawn card from Oliver and a typed letter from Lily. "Dear Grandma Roberts, I'm sorry I haven't written before. It's been hard to know what to say. Oliver and I are doing well. We're both in school and our foster family is really nice. I wanted you to know that I understand now why you made the choices you made. I've been in therapy, and my counselor helped me see that what Mom and Dad did wasn't your fault, and that you couldn't have saved us because you needed to save yourself first. I'm going to graduate high school next year. I want to study social work in college so I can help other kids who go through what we went through. Maybe someday, when I'm older, we can talk again. Love. Lily. P.S. Oliver wants you to know he scored 3 goals in his last soccer game." Camila cried when she read the letter, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of pride for the remarkable young woman her granddaughter was becoming, and tears of hope that someday, somehow, they might have a relationship again. That evening, she called Amanda Foster to tell her about the letter. "How do you feel?" Amanda asked. "Proud," Camila said without hesitation. Proud of Lily for her strength and maturity, proud of Oliver for building a new life, and proud of myself for not letting Marcus and Sophia destroy all of us. "Any regrets about not taking the plea deal?" Camila considered the question seriously. Marcus and Sophia would spend most of their 40s in prison. Their children were growing up without them. The family was irreparably broken. "No," she said finally. "They made their choices. They chose to see me as a target instead of as family. They chose cruelty over compassion, greed over love. Those choices had consequences, and it wasn't my job to protect them from those consequences." She paused, looking out the window of her condo at the garden she'd planted with David's roses, thriving in their new soil. "Besides," she continued, "I've learned something important. I spent so much of my life trying to be the perfect mother, the perfect grandmother, putting everyone else's needs before my own. I thought that's what love meant. But sometimes, love means setting boundaries. Sometimes love means saying no, even to the people you care about most." 3 years after the trial, Camila published a book about her experience, The Perfect Victim: How Family Financial Abuse Nearly Destroyed Me and How I Fought Back. The book became a bestseller and led to speaking engagements across the country. She used the book proceeds to establish a legal defense fund for elderly victims of family fraud, providing free legal representation for seniors who couldn't afford to fight back against their own adult children. On her 76th birthday, Camila received another letter from Lily, now a college sophomore studying social work at the University of Maryland. This letter was longer, more personal, and included an invitation. "Dear Grandma, I'm ready to see you again. If you want to see me, I know it's been a long time, and I know things can never go back to the way they were, but I'd like to try to build something new. Would you like to have coffee sometime?" Camila called the phone number Lily had included in the letter. They talked for 2 hours, sharing stories about their separate journeys through grief and healing. They made plans to meet the following weekend. As she hung up the phone, Camila felt a sense of completion she hadn't experienced in years. She'd lost her son, her savings, her home, and years of her life to Marcus and Sophia's greed. But she'd gained something to self-respect, purpose, and the knowledge that she was stronger than she'd ever imagined.
She'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior, even when that someone is your own child. She'd learned that justice matters more than peace, and that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary. Most importantly, she'd learned that it's never too late to start over, to find new purpose, to build new relationships based on mutual respect instead of obligation. That night, as she prepared for bed in her own home, surrounded by her own things, secure in her own independence, Camilla looked at David's picture on her nightstand. "I think you'd be proud of me," she told his smiling face.
I finally learned to put myself first. For the first time in years, she fell asleep smiling. The next morning, she began planning her first meeting with Lily in 3 years, wondering what kind of relationship they might build together, grandmother and granddaughter. Both survivors, both stronger for what they'd endured. It wouldn't be the family she'd once dreamed of, but it would be real, honest, and built on choice rather than obligation. And sometimes, Camilla had learned, that was the best kind of family of all.